All right, I believe that we can start. Thank you for joining. I'm more than happy to see so many people packed here today in this room. So today we'll be talking about type data API, which is one of the most important APIs in terms of understand how data is modeled in content entities in Drupal. Unfortunately, thank you. I've got my own camera, that is why I forgot to press it. Unfortunately, this API is a pretty well undocumented one, so that is why probably it stays quite a mystery for many. Yes, today we'll try to go to the bottom of it and hopefully finally understand it. Okay, so let me quickly swipe the slide, if possible. Cool. So some info about me. I'm Piotr Pakulski. I'm from Poland. Working currently as a Drupal developer with a team, a marketing team from Redwood City, California, Foxconn. I published my first website in 1999. Yes, and back today the top social media was Internet Relay Chat, if anyone remember. I'm a PHP developer for around 12 years now, working with Drupal from the light version 7. But before that, I used to be a Symfony developer. So for me, it was a pretty smooth transition. I just wanted to know some Drupalism related to 7, and then because we had a lot of Symfony modules under the hood of the 8, it was a pretty smooth transition. So you can find me on some socials, of course, like Drupal.org and LinkedIn. And I also do have my YouTube channel when I'm posting my hobby videos. Unfortunately, no one is watching, so feel free to subscribe. So I believe that right now is a great moment to say big thank you for the whole Florida Drupal camp team for organizing this beautiful event and for having me here. I'm in Orlando for at least a week now, and I must admit that I'm already in love with the state and with the city. A lot of cool stuff to visit, including the rocket launch, which took place yesterday's evening. According to Greg's Drupal map, it was a pretty long flight for me, starting from Katowice in Poland, then transfer in Frankfurt, Germany, and finally hitting Florida, Orlando, around 5,000 miles. Yes, and around 18 hours of flight together. In Poland, we also have our event related to Drupal, which is DrupalCamp Poland. This year it will take place 13th and 14th of May. By the way, the call for papers is still open, so feel free to push your session or just buy a ticket and visit us. This event is at least 10 years old right now, so it's pretty well established one. We have a great meal party between the days, and you should remember that Poland is a very safe country, one of the safest one in the whole United Europe, and still very, very reasonably cheap to visit. So you can easily communicate in English, and we have Uber, which is not so obvious in United Europe, so we can easily travel here and there. That should be absolutely no problem. All right. So let's quickly look on the agenda for today. We'll try to answer a few questions like why we need some kind of an API, and how and when it was introduced, and then we will check something more complicated like content entities and how they are modeled on top of our API. Then we'll go through some use cases, and in the end, hopefully there will be some questions. This should take us around 14 minutes. Okay, I will start with short refresh of the knowledge you have about PHP. Let's say you cannot use internet, and the question is, anyone knows how many variable building types PHP has? Listening for the answers, guys. Just guess. No answers at all? What do you think? One? No, it's not one. Once again?
7.
7, okay. Okay, so we've got 1 and 7, 20. Oh, that's a good one. Let's try to check in the official documentation. We have we have 9. So isn't it remarkable already that we have so many good developers here, and we weren't quite sure that how many building types we have.
Take away Google.
Yes, you know, but this might be a first small point why we may need some kind of an API for representing our data, right? So what we have null, bool, integer, float, string, array, object, callable, and this small guy is resource. Probably these two guys are the most interesting ones. So the callable is just a function or a method in a class that we can call via this call user func, and then it becomes to be a callable. And resource is indeed a resource, but it's outside of PHP, like FTP or a file or something like this. So yes, hopefully right now you will get this knowledge that we have 9 building types in PHP, which is good. And as we all know, PHP is a dynamically typed language. What does it mean? Everyone probably knows very well that types can be casted during the code execution from one type to another and back and forth. So this is a very good table showing us the loose comparison between some basic stuff like true, false, some integers represented in string and as integer type, MPRI and so on. As you can see, at least for me, this table looks pretty random. So this might be possibly the second point why we might need some API in terms of looking in the bottom of PHP, because you cannot really know what you can expect, to be honest. Of course, we can have this also this strict comparison. The table right now looks a bit more better, like you can see a lot of falses on the right side, but for me it's still kind of a blurry. Okay, so why we need type data API? As I said, we cannot rely on the type of certain data. So for example, we cannot be sure what we will get as a result from an external database, external API, how it will be casted during the process of code execution. And then, of course, when using this strict comparison, not always we can be sure if it is going to be a result that we are expecting. So we either use this loose comparison, which is not good at the end of the day. So I can bet that a lot of people are using just this guy rather than the strict comparison. Okay, so this is the summary for the first point, and let's see some. Let's examine some short example. We have these two integer types here. They look pretty similar. Anyone knows which one is some kind of a different? So this first guy is timestamp, as you probably see. So what's the problem with it is that in PHP we have no tool to provide some additional metadata that will allow us to know that this is indeed timestamp. Right? So, however, in some cases, it's useful to be able to define some abstract type to wrap our data. Okay, so right now we should be pretty good with our basic knowledge about PHP. So let's go down to the history. So back in the day in Drupal 7 we did not have type data API. We had this giant associative arrays, representing the fields in content entities and so on. So looking in the bullet points, so what was the problems with Drupal 7? There was no consistent way of defining data type. We weren't sure if it's a string, timestamp, integer, whatever. It was a pretty pain also to say if a field is translatable or not, so it was a tricky play to attach this information. Access levers were hard to define, like what user role can edit, add, and delete some type of node, for example. And very interesting point, the validation. I mean, back in the day we had this famous hook field validate. So the validation was very, very coupled to form API, which was a little bit also tricky and not super easy to read. And in the end, it was very hard to build a machine-readable API for data access. I'm not going to go strictly to the bottom of it, because of the time limitations, of course, but you can quickly investigate the Drupal 7 REST module, which might be a very interesting trip to see how difficult it used to be to build some kind of an API to talk with our data. Okay, so of course the community was aware of these problems with 7, so they created this Drupal thread. I recommend to visit it if you want to scan the history, how things were going there. And they decided that we need to implement API to unify entity properties and fields. This was kind of a bigger picture of the problems, but during the process they've spotted that we need some kind of maybe low-level API. So they decided that this API might be a metadata API. That was the first thought, that we should name it like this. And while the process, they decided that let's change the name for type data API. So that was the history. So they decided that this low-level API should consist of data list, complex data, and data primitives, whereas a list is a sequential list of data. Complex data contains any number of data properties. Sorry for that. We will get a clearer picture pretty soon about this. So they were able to prepare even some primitive types that will be built in, like string, boolean, integer, float, date, duration, URI, and binary. I believe right now in core we have just a little bit more of them. We will get to this also later on. During the process, they've separated, of course, a separate, different thread just to add the type data API for allowing metadata to be associated with data. A lot of data around here. Okay, so finally, in 8 we welcome the type data API. So this is a good image showing the comparison between 7 and 8. As you remember, we've got this giant associative arrays in 7 representing a lot of things, and browsing through them and traversing them was a pretty pain. So then in 8 we've got this beautiful representation going from, in this particular example, from bottom to top, like value, entity property, item, entity property, and entity. Cool. So we know the history, we know why, we know when, so let's try to find a place where we can know more about this API. So probably the first choice will be a Drupal org page. I bet that no one was before, has visited this page before.
I have.
You have, okay, that's good. As you can see, you will find there are 4 bullet points. Unfortunately, the last one is still not ready, so feel free to contribute after this session. It's definitely very valid. You can get some overview and plugins and definitions. Looking inside, you got some pretty cool description, but very modest one, a bunch of class names, interfaces names, and so on and so forth. At least for me, this description is, of course, it's valid, but it's not going to stick probably for very long in your memory. So it's valid, but not the perfect form of it. You can also find some interesting diagram there. This is, as I call it, a chicken diagram. I was revisiting this guy for many times, and each time it's a struggle and pain to understand what are the moving parts in this API. So I'm not going to use it today as an example. Okay, so if not Drupal org, what else we can check? We've got a great book from Daniel Sipos. In my case, it was Drupal 8 module development, the 2nd edition. I guess that right now you can buy the Drupal 9, which is the 3rd edition. I don't know if anyone knows what's the difference. So yeah, it's definitely a great book. I believe that everyone in some point of your life should read it. But stay alerted during the process. If you are not drinking too much coffee, and if you are not starting to losing your friends, since it's super time consuming and yeah, it requires a little bit of patience. Yeah, so what we've got inside about our API? The author was super kind to provide us 7 from nearly 600 pages book about dedicated to our API. What you will find there is flow of again, class names, interfaces names, and so on and so forth. But also you find very, very valid examples. But there are no diagrams, this kind of stuff. So again, it's pretty easy stuff to consume. Even the author on the end of this chapter is mentioning that I know that this is a very difficult section to follow. Just don't worry, move on. You can always go back and try to understand. So we will digest this today. Okay, so we know from where to get this information. So let's answer what the type data API really is. So it wraps values with any kind of complexity. So you can have a list of values that they maybe are primitives or a more complex one. Then it wraps them together and it's going to provide us some additional meaning. A good example might be the timestamp. And for example, license plate. By the way, this is a Polish license plate that is used in United Europe. So you at least have here two pieces of information, like the license plate number and the country number. And then we are wrapping it together with this beautiful square shape, which is our data definition. And this definition provides us additional information that this as a whole is a license plate indeed. Okay, maybe more examples, something more connected to United States. So we have this nutrition box sticker. I don't know if anyone is reading this, but as you can see, this is a list of, I would say, more complex ingredients, more complex data, like because we know what the cholesterol is, what are the proteins, what are vitamin A, D, for example, and how it's going to influence our bodies. So we have this list of more complex data, and then as a whole it's wrapped together with this nutrition fact sticker, which is providing us this metadata information that this is a nutrition fact sticker, and what's the serving size, and so on and so forth. Of course, this can be treated like one instance. We can fill it up with different values, so getting another instance and another instance. Okay, so we'll go through some examples. Let's see what's under the hood of our API. What are the moving parts there? So the type data API has two main pillars. So I was looking for some image that will stay with you for just a little bit longer than the chicken diagram. So yes, we have these two main pillars that we can instantiate again and again and again and again, building some structure on top of each. With we can build even something more complicated like a bridge. Okay, and this guy in the middle is a very important moving part there. We'll get soon to him. Okay, so let's see what we have. On the right we have data definitions, and on the left we have data type plugins. I will call them plugins and definitions. And the guy in the middle is a very important guy. He is a manager. He's type data manager. Because we are still around nutrition packs and cooking, this type of stuff, so the plugins are like the ingredients in the nutrition pack sticker, right? So you've got a bunch of like eggs, butter, milk, whatever, and you can choose from them. Okay, so it's a lot to choose from, and then you can prepare kind of a recipe, I would say, a wrapper for them. So you can put some of them in the in this list, in this recipe. But what's important now is that at this stage, this recipe and this called list does not contain any values. So we know that what are the ingredients, but we did not know right now how much milk will require, how many eggs, and so on. So then comes the very important guy, the manager. So what the manager is doing is he's grabbing and injecting values into this recipe list. So then we have a proper recipe, and based on this recipe we can bake a beautiful instance of a cake. So this is a recipe for a cake. Cool. So having the same recipe again, and the cake was not super tasty, we can inject different values, and again we'll get from the manager different instance of the cake and different values, different cake. So basically this is what the type data API is in the very bottom. So you can just try to remember these two pillars and one guy between them, and that should be it. So let's go with some code examples. Let's create some very primitive definition, so we can get a data definition based on a string primitive plugin. So we get this definition. This definition can get some additional metadata, like a simple label, right? And then comes the guy in the middle, which is the type data manager, and this guy is injecting value into the definition, right? So as a result, we are going to get another plugin, which can be an ingredient for even more complicated structure. And this plugin implements type data interface. So what we can do with this instance? Of course, we can grab a value, we can set a value. So it's already kind of a machine readable API, isn't it? Comparing to the associative arrays. And what else? We can get the data definition indeed. We can get the data type that was used to create this definition. We can get the label that we set here, and anything else that was attached to this particular definition. Let's go with something more complicated, like the representation of our license plate. So we have this, at least two pieces of information, like the plate number and the state code definition. By the way, this is a US license plate, I believe. So we can see these two data definitions created based on string. Both of them have a label. And then something more complicated. We are wrapping them together with a plate definition, which is built on top of a map data definition. And of course, it's also getting a label. So what is the map data definition? And this is a good question. To keep things super simple, I can say this is abstract representation of our favorite associative arrays from Drupal 7. So yes, we've created some abstract layer, but still it's super. There was a very strong need to have something very similar like this associative arrays, right? Okay, so at this point we have this definition of the plate, but we do not have the properties for them. So we are setting the properties like a number and a state and injecting the definitions for them that we prepared before. Okay, so we have this beautiful definition, but we still do not know what are the data inside, what are the values. So then again comes the manager into play, and the manager is grabbing this beautiful associative array and injecting to the plate definition. What's important here is that at this point, some automatically correct values are attached to the correct properties, right? So just using the keys from this array, and the manager is able to inject correct values in the correct place. As a result, we are going to get again a plugin which is type data map representation. What we can do with this instance, we can get the data definition for the plate itself. So we can get the label that this is license plate. We can go one level down. We can get a number. We can get a state. Get value, set value. Get the definition for each of these two pieces of information. So this guy is looking way more like kind of a machine readable API. Okay, and now something special. Using my enormous design skills as a backend developer, I prepared this beautiful diagram. Hopefully it's way better than the chicken one. So in the green squares you can see plugins, in the red squares you can see a definition. So again, two pillars, definitions and plugins. So let's go from the bottom. We can see that we have these two small green squares which are basic primitive strings wrapped together with a plate and a state definitions, and then they are wrapped together with even more complicated structure like the plate definition, which is map data definition, but this guy extends complex data definition base. Why I'm stressing this out? Because you will see in next slide that this is very commonly used base definition. Okay, so then the manager comes, injects some values, and we get the instance of map data type plugin. Cool, isn't it? Let's go with something more complicated. Finally, we are ready to see how content entities are modeled on top of our API. So I prepared this image again. This is the tuple, which is our type data API, and somehow comes the content entities API and unique help man, and then he is on top somehow, I don't know. And then comes another tuple, so these guys are piling up. So just don't ask, go and stick on top. I mean, you can see there, I don't know, user entities, configuration entities, taxonomy entities, and so on and so forth. But in the very bottom is our type data API and some bonus picture. Hopefully one day it's not going to look like this in Drupal, but maybe while debugging you can see sometimes that browsing down and down it may look like this indeed. Again, using my design skills, I prepared the representation of content entity. So what's new here is the blue squares, which are showing you where is the type data API in this whole structure. So content entities, as you know, are built on base fields and configurable fields. Both of these guys are lists. So starting with configurable fields, what you will find there? Probably in the red square you might expect some kind of a definition, but This time it's a field configuration entity, so it's a bit more complicated. But this guy implements data definition interface. What does it mean? That it plays two roles. Besides the configuration entity, it also is a data definition. So again, one of the pillars we need. And looking in the base fields, here is way more simpler. You just get this definition, base field definition. But when you decide to change anything, the base field is going to be base field override definition, which is pretty similar what we get in configurable fields. Okay, so we've got these two lists. We are wrapping them together. Yeah, then when some values are injected by the manager, we are going to get entity adapter instance. You probably heard about it for a few times. This guy extends straight from type data class. So as you can see, it's built again on top. What it is, it's a data type plugin that defines entity data type. Right, so going back to our cooking example, this might be a little bit more complicated structure. As I said, a plugin of a cake. The second one can be kind of a steak, and wrapping them together with some additional meaning, we can get a beautiful dinner. So this is the representation of how complex entity API really is. So, but I've promised you to go to the bottom, so we'll go and quickly see what we have inside the base fields. Again, as I said, this is a list. We might expect that we have some definitions in the list. So indeed, there is a field item data definition. When injecting values into it, we are going to get some kind of a field type, depending what this field really is. So as an example, it can be a string item that extends string item base, but this guy extends map data type plugin. Probably you remember this from the license plate example, right? So this is again built on top of our API. Then wrapping them together with another definition like a base definition, but this guy extends this data definition, which comes also from type data API. And again, injecting values, we are going to get field item list, but this extends item list data type plugin coming straight from type data API. So this might be a little bit complicated, but you can see how things are built on top of type data API and why there was a need to build some kind of a low-level API. Going back to cooking example, some low-level ingredients like eggs, another butter, and as a result we are getting this cake, which was the cake from this previous slide here in the base fields. All right, so I believe we are good with nearly almost everything. Let's go through some examples, like checking, for example, what built-in plugins we have in core. So as you can see, this is a little bit longer than it was defined in the Drupal thread. What you can find there, going from the bottom: URI, timestamp, timespan, string data map, probably you remember, language reference, language item list, probably you remember from the content entities, integer data, float data, even email has his own plugin, duration, data in Boolean, binary, and one guy which was pretty unexpected, at least for me, the any type. So let's look what's inside. So indeed, any is something that may contain any PHP data for which no further metadata is available. Cool, isn't it? Let's see if it is used anywhere in core, and indeed it is. For example, datetime item. We have these property definitions here, and date is built on top of data definition, which is using any plugin type, and some labels and other stuff that's needed. So okay, what you can visit also to understand better the type data API. I would recommend this GitHub repository. You can find there 4 bullet points like primitives, lists, maps, and serialization. Unfortunately, only the primitives and maps are ready currently. On the right, you can see one example of for example, a price, which is built on map data definition, which you probably remember. So you can set 2 properties like number and currency code. And currency code also, you get some constraints to validate, and then you get some testing code for this. So really a good place to visit to gain knowledge. In terms of building some machine-readable API, I would recommend this 5jars blog, Type Data API in Drupal 8. These guys describe value very well. Good example how you can build some kind of an API on top of type data. Here we have demo API response definition. So as you can see, response definition extends complex data definition base. Again, the same class that we've seen a lot of times before. In this example, the properties are like status, commands, results. The results is a pretty interesting one, which is list data definition, which probably you remember from content entities. That is going to get some labels, constraints, and so on. All right, that was a pretty quick one, but since it's the last question, I don't want to keep you as long as possible. So thank you very much for joining today. I'm listening for any questions from you.
Speed run. Move through it.
Yes, that was the speed run, but as I said, since it's the last session today, I don't want to keep you too long. Everyone is waiting for having a beer and so on. I hope this image will stay with you with these two pillars. Yes, there you go.
Do you have any examples of where it would make sense to define your own data structure on like the normal Drupal site? Because I've never needed to or never thought I needed to.
Currently, I do not have some good examples how. Maybe this, I would recommend visiting this GitHub repository. You will find there some good examples. Then visiting this 5jars blog, then you see how you can use it, for example, to build API and prepare some response based on this API. But as I said, basically you can imagine that you have our low-level API, which is type data, then content entities, and so on and so forth. So
I think it's helpful just to understand, though, even in the context of using the existing
condition,
it's kind
I know.
of curious
It
sometimes.
helps you to be able to read the code and understand a little bit about core, or if you're trying to debug a core issue, it maybe help.
Certainly help me understand that schema YAML file.
Yeah, so it's good to know that we have this kind of an API, which probably was quite of a mystery for many. All right. So we are good. Thank you.
Thank you.